Today we are going to talk about the carbon cycle. Again, this is part of the basics of climate change. So today's warm-up is Lesson 26 warm-up. It is on Google Classroom. The question is just, how does carbon move from one location to another? So you can give any example you can think of. If you don't know, just take your best guess. So go ahead and pause the video and do that, and then come back. Awesome. So today's agenda, today we did the warm-up, and then we did a quick recap of the last lesson. Then we introduced the carbon cycle, and then then we did a carbon cycling game, and lastly we did the exit slope. The focus question for today and for next class is, how does carbon move throughout the Earth? The learning target, so what you'll be able to do by the end of next class is you will be able to use a model to explain how carbon moves from one location to another. So, quick recap of last class. The focus question was, how have climates changed over geological time? Again, geological time is a long time in the eyes of the Earth. So that would be like thousands, millions, or even billions of years. Our planet is very old. And so what we looked at this graph that shows carbon dioxide levels in green and temperature levels in blue. And as you can see, whenever carbon dioxide goes up, temperature also goes up, and vice versa. So it's a lot of up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, and then finally up. So what we can see from this graph is that the temperature of the global climate has changed kind of a lot in the past 500,000-ish years. These low points right here are actually when you might see an ice age, because the temperatures have dropped enough. But to make the global temperatures have dropped enough to an ice age is just when global temperatures are relatively low. So there is more ice. But an ice age is not like in the Ice Age movie where there's just ice covering the entire planet. Not like that. But at any rate, as we can see, natural fluctuations in carbon dioxide and in temperature are normal. So it's normal for carbon dioxide and temperature to go up and then to go down and up and down. That's totally normal. This is sort of a cycle. Climate change is a cycle. The only unusual thing is how quickly we are causing it to change by putting in all this carbon dioxide in at once. That's very unusual. That's not natural. So let's talk about carbon. So carbon is an important element for life on Earth and can be found in different forms, having very, very different properties. So if you take a bunch of carbon atoms and kind of put them into a crystal, a very orderly crystal, you get diamond. But if you take all those same carbon atoms and just layer them in a different way, you could get something like graphite, which is the lead of a pencil. These two substances are very different. This is one of the hardest materials that we have on Earth, and this one, as you probably know, is extremely brittle. We can also combine carbon pretty easily with other elements to form new substances. So for example, if we take carbon and combine it with two oxygen atoms, we form carbon dioxide, CO2. So here's carbon, this black atom right here, and then we've got two red oxygen atoms here. The color, of course, is just for this diagram, but carbon combines very easily with other elements as well. And carbon is in almost anything you can think of. So it's in your food, it's in your clothes, it's in your body, it's in everything around you. It's everywhere. And so you might be able to guess that the carbon contained in any one thing does not stay there forever. The carbon atoms move from one thing to another in what is called the carbon cycle. So like the water cycle, which describes how water moves everywhere, the carbon cycle describes how carbon moves everywhere. So now we're going to talk about the carbon cycle. And to do that, we have to start with the four spheres of the Earth. So everything on Earth can be broken into four kind of spheres, we call them. The four major spheres of the planet are the biosphere, the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, and the geosphere. Carbon can be found in all four of these spheres. But what are they? The biosphere. The prefix is bio, so as you might guess, the biosphere is just talking about everything living on Earth. So if you look at this picture, it's kind of all this green stuff. So it's got plants, it's got animals, it also includes bacteria and fungi. It's everything alive, all the biotic factors on the entire Earth. That's all the biosphere. The atmosphere, as you probably already know, that's the air, and that's the sky. That's just a lot of gases, the gases surrounding Earth. The hydrosphere, as you could probably guess, hydro means water, and so the hydrosphere is that's talking about all the water on Earth. And lastly, the geosphere. Geo, the prefix geo means Earth, so the geosphere is actually kind of it's all the land on Earth. It includes the Earth's crust, it includes rocks and sediments. Basically, it's just a bunch of rocks. All the rocks that are on Earth, all the minerals. So carbon can be found in all four of these spheres. And within these four spheres, there are many places and things in particular that store carbon. So things that store carbon are called carbon reservoirs or carbon stores. When I'm speaking, I tend to call them carbon stores, but the more proper term is actually carbon reservoir. So carbon is constantly moving between these carbon reservoirs. And today we actually modeled some of those movements. So we did a carbon cycling activity where each of your classmates was in charge of one reservoir: the atmosphere, water, aquatic plants, rocks and sediments, land animals, land plants, or aquatic animals. And each reservoir starts with 3 carbon atoms. Their job was to decide where to send to which other reservoir they should send their carbon atoms. And each reservoir can only send their carbon atoms to certain reservoirs and for certain reasons. All of these reservoirs have very special relationships. And so when they sent a carbon atom to another reservoir, they had to narrate the process. So they had to say exactly why they were able to send their carbon to another reservoir. And so we took turns moving carbon around and just seeing how much carbon moves. But also all 7 of these reservoirs will always contain carbon. So as they moved the carbon atoms, each reservoir could not have less than 1 carbon atom. They had to have at least 1. And after a few rounds, we saw how much the carbon had moved. So if you would like to do this on your own, if you go into Google Classroom, there's a post called Lesson 26, Carbon Cycling Rules. If you open this PDF, you're going to see all of the different reservoirs that there were. There are 7. Next to the reservoir, you'll see a picture, just so that no one's confused. And then after that, there's a column that says Options for Carbon Flow. This describes how carbon can move from this reservoir to other reservoirs. And then next to that, the column to the right, there's an explanation for why carbon can move to these other reservoirs. And then lastly is script lines. So that's what your classmates had to actually say as they move the carbon. So, for example, the atmosphere. Atmosphere can move carbon to water because carbon dioxide from the atmosphere dissolves into water. Probably didn't know that, but it dissolves into water. Or carbon from the atmosphere can go into trees because carbon dioxide is taken up by land plants in order to perform photosynthesis. So for both of these things, we could move 1 carbon from the atmosphere to land plants, because again, land plants take in carbon dioxide to do photosynthesis. And we could also move 1 carbon from the atmosphere to water, because carbon dioxide gets dissolved in water. Okay, so these are things that you can actually do on your own. Regardless, you should read through this document. And because this is going to be really important for next class, it's showing you how carbon can move through the different spheres of the Earth. If you want to actually move the carbon by yourself so that you can see it, you can click on this link right here and you can make a copy of the Jamboard that I was just on. You can make a copy of this one, right? And then lastly was the exit slip. So the exit slip is called Lesson 26 exit slip. The questions, there are 3 questions. 2 of the questions have multiple parts. But question 1 says, use the following diagram to answer question 1. So on this diagram, you'll see there's a number 1, a number 2, a number 3, and a number 4. Your job is to figure out if these 4 things are the atmosphere, the biosphere, the geosphere, or the hydrosphere. All right. Second, question 2 says, which of the spheres do the following carbon reservoirs represent? Only select 1 answer per row. So your job is to go through these carbon reservoirs, which were on that Google Jamboard, and decide if these are the atmosphere, the biosphere, the geosphere, or the hydrosphere. There can be multiple answers for each column, but there can only be 1 answer for each row. So air is only the atmosphere or the biosphere or the geosphere or the hydrosphere. It cannot be all 4, cannot be 2 of them. But there could be multiple for the atmosphere. And then lastly, number 3, what is 1 way that carbon moves from 1 carbon reservoir to another? In your answer, explain which reservoir the carbon moves from and which reservoir it moves to. So we saw many examples of this in the carbon cycling game. And so in your answer, you should say carbon moves from blah, 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 carbon reservoir, to blah, 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 other carbon reservoir, and then why. So yep, go ahead and submit that. And that's all. That was all for today. And I hope to see you in class next time.